why nobody really knows what they're doing, and why that's actually good news. Have you ever read these words from Proverbs 3 verse 5? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. It's a verse millions of people know, but here's the strange part. It quietly admits something most people spend their lives trying to hide. You don't have all the answers, and neither does anyone else. The people who seem confident, the successful entrepreneur, the professor, the CEO, even the people giving advice online. Most of them are figuring things out one decision at a time, just like you. The difference isn't that they know exactly what they're doing. The difference is that they keep moving anyway. From the outside, adulthood looks like a place where everyone finally becomes certain. You imagine that one day you'll wake up knowing how relationships work, how careers unfold, how money should be managed, and how to make all the right decisions. Then that day arrives, and nothing changes. You still hesitate before making important choices. You still wonder if you're making mistakes. You still compare yourself to people who seem far more confident. But here's something psychologists have noticed for years. Confidence and certainty aren't the same thing. Research in behavioral science consistently shows that people often mistake confidence for competence. In fact, one of the most famous findings in psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect, suggests that people with the least knowledge are sometimes the most certain, while people with greater expertise become more aware of how much they still don't know. The more you learn, the more you realize how much there is left to understand. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. King Solomon, remembered as one of history's wisest rulers, wrote, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Notice he didn't say wisdom begins with having all the answers. It begins with humility. Modern neuroscience points in a similar direction. Your brain is constantly making predictions about the future using incomplete information. Every decision you make is really your brain creating its best guess from past experiences. Even when you're absolutely convinced you're right, your mind is filling in gaps without you realizing it. That's how human brains survive. Not by knowing everything, by adapting. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. No amount of reading prepares you for balancing on two wheels. Eventually, you simply start. You wobble, you overcorrect, you nearly fall. Then your brain quietly rewires itself through experience. Life works the same way. You don't become ready before you begin. You become ready because you begin. History is full of people who understood this. When Thomas Edison searched for a practical light bulb, he wasn't following a perfect map. Thousands of attempts failed before one finally worked. Each failure wasn't proof that he didn't know what he was doing. It was the process of discovering what worked. The Wright brothers weren't world-famous engineers. They owned a bicycle shop. Yet their curiosity and willingness to keep experimenting changed transportation forever. Even the Apostle Peter shows this pattern. He stepped out of the boat before he knew exactly how things would unfold. For a moment, he walked on water. Then fear took over. He sank. But notice something remarkable. Peter wasn't corrected for stepping out. He was encouraged to strengthen his faith. Growth almost always begins with imperfect action, not perfect certainty. Here's something your brain naturally does that can make this harder. It's called the spotlight effect. Researchers have found that people consistently overestimate how much others notice their mistakes. Your brain assumes everyone is paying close attention to your awkward moments, your wrong decisions, or your failures. In reality, most people are too busy worrying about their own lives. That presentation you keep replaying in your head, someone else has already forgotten it. That awkward conversation, the other person is probably thinking about something completely different. Your mistakes feel enormous because you're living inside your own mind. Everyone else is living inside theirs. Social media makes this even more confusing. You're usually seeing someone's highlight reel after months or years of hidden uncertainty. The successful business looks effortless. The happy marriage seems automatic. The confident speaker appears fearless. But behind every polished result were countless moments that never made it onto the screen. Questions, failures, second guesses, quiet nights wondering if any of it would work. Even some of history's greatest thinkers admitted uncertainty. Socrates famously said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." That isn't pessimism, it's freedom. Because once you stop pretending to know everything, you become willing to learn anything. Researchers studying lifelong learning have found that curiosity predicts continuous growth better than believing you've already mastered a subject. Curious people ask more questions, seek more feedback, and adapt more quickly when circumstances change. Your future depends less on always being right and more on staying teachable. Jesus often taught in parables instead of straightforward answers. Why? Because transformation usually happens through seeking, reflecting, and growing, not simply collecting information. Faith itself involves trust despite uncertainty. Hebrews describes faith as confidence in what is hoped for, not proof of everything already seen. That's deeply comforting. You don't need complete clarity before taking the next faithful step. You only need enough light for today. Maybe that's why so many people feel exhausted. They're trying to reach a level of certainty that doesn't actually exist. They're waiting until they feel completely ready, completely confident, completely qualified. Meanwhile, opportunities quietly pass by. Imagine if every parent waited until they knew everything before raising a child. Imagine if every inventor waited until every answer appeared. Imagine if every believer waited until every question disappeared before trusting God. Nothing would ever begin. Life has always moved forward through imperfect people making imperfect decisions with limited information. That's not a flaw. That's the design. So if you've been feeling like everyone else somehow received an instruction manual that you missed, here's something worth remembering. They didn't. They're learning, adjusting, making mistakes, growing, exactly like you. The people who eventually build meaningful lives aren't the ones who eliminate uncertainty. They're the ones who stop treating uncertainty as an enemy. Today, try something simple. Make the phone call you've been avoiding. Start the project that's been sitting in your notes. Ask the question you were afraid would sound foolish. Read one chapter, take one walk, pray one honest prayer. Not because you're certain it'll work, but because growth has never belonged to people who knew everything. It has always belonged to people who were humble enough to keep learning, courageous enough to keep moving, and faithful enough to take the next step anyway. Because maybe the greatest sign that you're finally growing isn't that you know exactly what you're doing. It's that you've stopped being afraid of not knowing.